Verrosteten Stahlhelmen und Waffen. Neben den ausgebrannten Panzern hockt und lauert der Tod.
What sounds like war reporting was actually created in the summer of 1947. The Battle of Hurtgen Forest, and along the Siegfried Line from 1944 to 1945, is one of the last great myths of World War II. It is known as the longest battle on German soil, as well as the Verdun in the Eifel. Hemingway, as an eyewitness war reporter, called it the forest where dragons live. In the USA, places like Fossenach and Schmidt are better known than they are in Germany. And in the history of the U.S. military, the All Souls Day battle is known as the greatest defeat of an American division in the Second World War.
As a matter of fact, I spoke to the advanced course at Fort Leavenworth several years ago. And I explained to them, yes, exactly, it is a total disaster.
Jeder wusste genau, der Krieg ist verloren zu der Zeit.
At that time, everybody knew the war was lost. And then you behave completely differently than how we fought when we still believed in a German victory. This was no longer the case, but we had to hold out. The order was to hold out. There was no other choice.
I saw the forest. It was beautiful in places, rough in places. There are a lot of drops. There are a lot of creeks. It's not smooth. It's very rough, the Hurtgen Forest, in places. But then there are places with these majestic trees. Sometimes I would look at them and I had the feeling that somehow they knew how foolish we were.
Many reports estimate 56,000 dead on the American side alone, more than the U.S. military lost in Vietnam, a dubious number which has endured to the present day.
Dragon's Teeth, the Siegfried Line, the Green Hell, terms that remind one of old German myths and fairy tales, of the Nibelungenlied, of the Nazi propaganda about the eternal forest, of stories of ghosts and evil witches in the deep woods. The myth of the German forest, which swallowed the Roman legions, is a legend that has been burned deep into the national psyche since the days of Hermann the German.
James Gavin, the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, wrote after the war,
"For us, Hurtgen was one of the most costly, most unproductive, and most ill-advised battles that our army has ever fought."
Hurtgen Forest is probably the only case in which a community bears the name of a battle. The Americans named the forest between Monschau, Düren, and Aachen after their tactical objective, the small village of Hurtgen. The name Hurtgen sounded like to hurt, with a German ending.
Such a forest where everything was so overgrown. It was the same when they shot at us. You could scarcely move. All of the branches lay on the ground and you couldn't move at all without making some sort of noise. And then you always stopped and thought, is something going to happen or not? This fear plagued both sides.
Also da war auch diese Angst, die war auf beiden Seiten da.
When it hit the tree, it was like flakes, snowflakes. Snowflakes are gentle, but these came down, with a tremendous speed. And you would hear it going by you, and you could see going deep into the ground, all around you. And if it hit you, that was it. It would take your shoulder off, it would take your head, and this has happened. I don't know how I made it.
The military historian Charles MacDonald writes in the Siegfried Line campaign of a black-green ocean of forest, in which the GIs felt like Hansel and Gretel, who had lost their way. Villages and landscapes were bombed out and devastated by the months of fighting. The site is deserted, and horror lives in the forests. Riddled, mined, and contaminated with combat ordnance, that is the image of Hurtgen Forest that the soldiers of both sides remember.
Up to that point, I had never heard of the Hurtgen Forest. And as these guys were coming, we didn't know what the name of this forest was. It's the death forest. It's this kind of forest. You know, all things, all dealing with death. You know, a death trap or whatever. When soldiers came out, they said something. We learned, because officers never told us anything.
Hundreds of soldiers are still missing in the forests. Sometimes friend and foe lie next to one another, as at this site, in the Ochsenkopf combat zone. The Battle of Hurtgen Forest was a threefold defeat. For the German Wehrmacht, because it didn't defend the homeland, but rather a criminal regime. For the population, because the Western defense unnecessarily prolonged the war that was already lost. And for the Americans, because they paid a high price in blood for an objective that they could have simply gone around.
This was Eisenhower who insisted in staying in that forest, in fighting, you know, the old-fashioned way of World War I. He had been in World War I.
August 1944, Paris. Just 11 weeks after...